like to belong. We were made for relationship and for community, but the majority of us, we looked at this statistically, across the United States, feel alone. We feel unseen and we feel unknown. So there's this gap between this deep desire we have, but our actual experience is so far from what we're looking for. So we said that true belonging can only happen when we come home to God's perfect love and we allow it to heal us and transform our lives, and then we live that out in real community. And so we talked about how we're affected by the relationships before us. We talked about at the beginning pages of the Bible how sin entered the world and how human brokenness has been a historical fact since humans have been around. And Jesus breaks that pattern of our old story and of the relationships before us by bringing us into a new spiritual family. So that was kind of the groundwork we laid. And what we've been doing is we've been walking through 6 practices that cultivate belonging. And we've covered hospitality. The first week we talked about engagement. Last week John took us through that. And this week we're going to dive into the third practice, which is vulnerability. You may think I've never read the word vulnerability in the Bible, and you would be correct. You can't find it in a word search, but just because the word vulnerability doesn't show up in the Bible doesn't mean the concept of it doesn't show up. And so what we do find in the Bible is we find the issue of fear. We find a fear to be seen and to be known for who we really are. We find a fear of our weaknesses and our wounds. We see a fear of others and being rejected. That is in a lot of places. In fact, it's one of the most repeated things in the Bible is to not fear. And so this is a human challenge we face because of the world we live in and the relationships that we've experienced. And fear keeps us from belonging in authentic community and relationships. So that's why vulnerability is essential on this path to true belonging. We got to learn to practice this if we're going to experience what God made us for. Our big idea today is just that vulnerability is the openness and honesty that allows grace to flow into our life. It's the openness and honesty that allows grace to flow into our lives. In God's kingdom, belonging does not come from strength and perfection, right? We don't get included because we're awesome. It comes from the openness and honesty of the fact that we need Jesus. So vulnerability is a starting point for how we even begin to interact with God. And it's important because it is taking the risk to let others in, most importantly, God himself. But when we let others in, it allows grace to be experienced in a real way. It's how we kind of open the door, both to God and to other people, to let grace become real and applied in our life. So we're going to talk about 3 ways that Jesus helps walk us into vulnerability, because it's kind of scary to go there, but Jesus leads us gently into it. And we're going to talk about how we can do that together with other people. So we're going to be in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 5 through 10. And if you want to, you can open up one of the Bibles underneath the chair that you're sitting on, and it's on page 550. You can also find it in the app, or it'll be on the screen. And I still don't think the Browns have kicked off yet. I literally have it right here. So we're in the same boat, if you care. 2 Corinthians 12. Paul is the author of this letter to a Jesus community. And what's really challenging about who he's writing to is they were questioning him. They were questioning his authority and his legitimacy as an apostle, someone who was carrying the message of Jesus. And so he's being brought under question. He's being put under the fire a little. And instead of flexing his greatness or getting defensive, he leads by his weakness. And that is what is so counterintuitive to the vulnerability that Jesus leads us into. Let's read this. Starting in verse 5, it says, "I will boast about a man like that, but I will not boast about myself except about my weakness. Even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool, because I would be speaking the truth. But I refrain, so no one will think more of me than is warranted by what I do or say, or because of these surpassingly great revelations. Therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So his authority is brought under question. The validity of what he's been teaching this church in Corinth is being brought into question. He says, I'm not going to start by telling you why I'm more impressive or why I'm better than the other messages you're hearing. I'm going to start with vulnerability. The first thing we find to walk into vulnerability and how to practice in community is that vulnerability begins with honest humility. It begins with honest humility. Paul talks about boasting in his weakness instead of his greatness. That idea of boast is to take pride in, right? It's like the part of our lives that we're really proud of, our achievements. It's the thing we glory in. It's what you highlight about your life, right? It's the things you post on social media. You're like, this is the thing I want people to know about me. And then there's all the things that we don't post because we don't want the world to know that we lose our cool on our kids and that we binge Netflix till midnight last night and had a hard time getting out of bed. The greatness versus weakness contrast is something that Paul is drawing out. And we all have this tendency. We have a tendency to want to display our greatness, right? Oh, I'm amazing. And then there's the side of us that we don't post on social media. And it's the part of us that kind of isn't awesome and kind of stinks a little bit, right? And we want to make sure that this part of our lives is hidden. We want people to see that, but we don't want people to see that. We don't want our weaknesses to be exposed. And we would rather be known for our greatness. The idea of humility sounds great in theory, right? We want to have the perception of being humble, but we still kind of want to be admired without really leaning into what humility looks like. We'd prefer to have belonging without shining the spotlight on our weaknesses and inadequacies. Brene Brown is a clinical psychologist. She researches topics like shame and vulnerability. She has this really interesting quote. She says, vulnerability is the last thing I want you to see in me, but the first thing I look for in you. Isn't that true, right? That's what this is. I'm looking for that in your life, but I want you to see this in mine. We often think we are better than we really are. And this is what makes vulnerability so hard, is that we rarely stop comparing and critiquing others long enough to honestly evaluate ourselves. Most of the time, we can't be vulnerable because we're just not comfortable with that version of us, with the parts of us that are still growing, the parts of us that are incomplete and broken. We spend more time usually trying to run away from or ignore the past than figure out why it is part of our story and what God is doing with it. Jesus is our prime example of humility. Jesus models humility because he was fully God and fully human. So stick with me for a minute because this is a core truth to following Jesus that lots of books have been written on. You could have lots of conversations, but there's a nugget in it that's essential for this conversation on belonging. Jesus was both fully God and fully human, so that means that while he had divine nature and power and wisdom, that was very real. His limitations and his weaknesses and his neediness was also very real. We have to, if we're going to follow the real Jesus, we have to hold both of those things in tension without compromising one or the other. And again, there's a lot of books and conflicts that have happened about not being able to hold that tension. But every follower of Jesus who's been faithful to who Jesus said he was holds both of those things together. Notice that I didn't say that Jesus was sinful. We know that while Jesus was tempted in every way, just like we were, he did not sin. And in fact, in Hebrews 4:15, it says that's why he's able to empathize with us in our weakness. He's able to understand weakness because he was really a human. He was really just like us. Those human experiences were very real to him. It says in Philippians 2 that Jesus, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. He didn't take pride in it. He didn't boast in it. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, by being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a human, as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So Jesus makes himself vulnerable. The whole concept of God willingly giving up his life is one of the greatest signs of vulnerability that God displays for us. He became human. He put flesh on, it says in John 1, that he willingly gave up his life in John 10. We see that he who was without sin became sin so that we might experience the righteousness of God, the greatness of God. That's 2 Corinthians 5. We see that he has described a humble and gentle heart. That means he's accessible to us. When Jesus talks about humility, it means he gets on our level. He gets on our level so that we might be able to experience the life and freedom that he wants to give. In that passage in Philippians 2, it starts off in verse 5 by saying that we should have this same mindset in our relationships with each other. It's actually not just a passage on Jesus's humanity and his divinity. It's a passage on our belonging. And this is the template for it. But I mean, look at what happened with Jesus. He got crucified. And that's the fear and vulnerability, is like when people see who I really am, when I open myself up, when I let others in, what if they come after me? Honest, humble vulnerability will mean that you can be rejected. Jesus is a great example of that. But it doesn't mean that we can't enter into it. When we humble ourselves, we reflect the character of Christ. And we can do it because we know that on the other end of it, there's life. Jesus is saying, if you follow me through your weakness, through humility, with honesty, on the other end of that, you're going to experience life in me. So vulnerability starts with letting go of self-protection, wanting to hide, and kind of only promote our greatness. We might ask ourselves, what in my life am I trying to appear stronger or better at than I actually am? And why am I not being honest? That might be a good starting point for us. Like, what am I trying to put the appearance on that I'm stronger or better at? The second way that we walk into vulnerability and practice it in community is that we should see vulnerability as possible because of God's grace. It's possible because of God's grace. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, it says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This is what Paul said that the Lord reminded him of or spoke to him about so that he could walk through his weaknesses differently. It's been said that mercy is not getting what we do deserve, but grace is getting what we don't deserve. So God's favor, his kindness, his goodness, what he does in our lives, his grace is given to us not because we deserve it. It's given in spite of our weaknesses. Do you catch that? Like, God is being good to you not because you're so great. He's being good to you because he wants to be, and he knows every part of you. You can't hide this from him. He already knows about it. And so when he chooses to be kind to us and his goodness shows up in our life, it's not because we pulled one over God and one day he's going to find out, and when he sees the real us, oh no, it's all going to come crumbling down. God's grace is not earned. It's given to us in spite of the fact that we don't deserve it. And what makes vulnerability possible, what makes it safe, is that God's grace already covers my weaknesses. It says it's sufficient. That means that where I'm not enough, Jesus is enough. That's huge. You don't have to get it all together. Maybe this is like your first time back at church for a while, and you're like, I hope the walls don't fall down on me or get struck by lightning. It's like you're in a school, you're safe, I don't know, but God's still here. And his grace is sufficient for your weaknesses. What we should see is that we don't have to hide who we are. We can see that grace covers every part of our lives. He sees all of us. Grace makes a relationship with God safe. It even makes a relationship with each other safe. This is why Jesus is good news. We don't have to act like we are something that we're not. We can confess our brokenness and our weakness, and in honest humility, own what's actually true. David Kim, I really like this quote. He said, vulnerability isn't only confession of sins, but it's also learning to own and tell our stories truthfully. What does he mean by own and tell our stories truthfully? It means that God's story is being written over every part of our life. If we only talk about the great things that God's doing, we're robbing some of the truth of our story about how God's working through the weaknesses. Tim Keller said it this way. He said, the gospel is this, that we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dare believe, yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. That is the good news. You actually don't know how bad you are. You are more flawed. You are more sinful, right? Than you even knew. And thank goodness that God is gracious and he doesn't spend our whole lives pointing those things out. But sometimes we see moments like, man, is that really where my heart is at? But in the same tone of being honest about how flawed we actually are, we see that we are more loved and accepted. Guys, that is huge. Where else in our life, in our relationships, can we be worse than we thought we were, yet be more embraced despite it? Jesus loves you. He loves all of you. He loves the broken parts of you. He loves the incomplete parts of you. He sees you for who you are. And so for Paul, he does this by describing it as having a thorn in his flesh, something he couldn't outrun or outgrow or get rid of. In fact, in verse 7, he says that while we don't know what the weakness or struggle was, he says that he repeatedly asked God to take it away from his life so he wouldn't struggle with it anymore. It's not important what he struggled with or what his weakness was. It matters that God chose not to remove it from his life. Why? If we're going to be honest and humble and allow God's grace to affect every part of our lives, then we have to learn to relate to our weaknesses in a different way. We can't just run from them. They won't all get healed or taken away. Vulnerability is often seen as weakness, but I love this quote by Scott Erickson. He says, vulnerability is actually our relationship to our weaknesses, not our weaknesses themselves. We have to see our weakness not as a way to keep us away from belonging with God and others, but as a way to greater experience grace in our lives, undeserved favor. A healthy, grace-filled relationship with my weaknesses means that I can still know who I truly am in my weaknesses and struggle without being consumed by it. I know some people who are consumed by their weaknesses, and I hurt for them because they haven't invited God's grace into their life in the way that he wants that. Most of our relationships with our weaknesses means running away from it or ignoring it. We said that. A great exercise to become more real in your life and to become more vulnerable, to how to better relate to your mistakes is called the 3 layers exercise. Every challenge and struggle you've ever had in your life is simply just the first layer of the problem. In the 3 layers exercise, what you do is the first layer is naming what happened, right? I lied. That's not vulnerability, because you can get caught in a lie. You don't have to confess that you lied for that to be exposed. But it can be true. There's times where we lie. There's times where something wrong happens. Our weaknesses are exposed. The next layer is actually to say, well, why did that happen? Well, I lied because I didn't want to look bad. That's a whole nother level of vulnerability than just, yeah, I made a mistake. We're starting to get deeper. If you'll ask one more question, well, what were you feeling that led to that? I was genuinely scared to lose you. Guys, this is like what Donkey does to Shrek, where he's like, you're an onion, and I'm going to peel you back, right? This is what your spouse is trying to do when they're trying to be like, or your roommate, right? And they're like, well, what happened? Why did you leave the dishes out? And you're like, I don't know. Just leave me alone. I was rushed. Okay, you were rushed. Why were you rushed? What were you feeling? Feeling like I can't carry everything in life right now. Whoa. Guys, when you go to the deeper layers of actually talking about the motive behind it and the feelings that go into that, you are actually walking into vulnerability, a true vulnerability, a real opening of ourselves that really we all long for. That layer 3 is way different than layer 1. It's the way that I start to allow grace to flow into my life. And I need to learn what is actually happening in my soul and how to better relate to it, not just to manage my mistakes. So we might ask ourselves, what is something I've been struggling with, and what's actually beneath it? This is a part of the more flawed, right? The fact that I'm genuinely scared to lose you shows that I'm far more broken than maybe I even knew. But when we get to that, we begin to experience the love and the grace that allows true belonging to happen. The third and final way to walk into vulnerability and practice it in community is it's going to require an open heart and relational courage. It's going to require an open heart and relational courage. We see in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10, Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. Because when I am weak, I am strong. We started by talking about how fear keeps us back from vulnerability. So it's courage that we need to combat that fear. And courage is what we're going to need because it feels risky. It feels risky to do the 3 layers exercise. It feels risky to let people see every part of us. C.S. Lewis talks about this. He actually writes on love and relationships in his book, The 4 Loves. He says there's no safe investment. To love is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one. Spot on, C.S. Lewis. If you aren't willing to be vulnerable, just end your pursuit of belonging today, because you're going to have your heart broken. If you're not going to give up on belonging, it's going to require relational courage. It is a risk. It's fair that it feels hard. Hiding behind a mask does not require courage, but taking off the mask does. While being vulnerable is always risky, we can courageously take that risk knowing that Jesus' humility and God's grace will guide us safely forward. In another part of the letter we read, those same people who were questioning Paul's authority and his teaching, he says this, that we have spoken freely to you, Corinthians, and opened wide our hearts to you. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. And as a fair exchange, I'm speaking to you as my children, someone I love, open wide your hearts also. This issue that we're talking about is a hard issue. I worked really hard on this. That's why the whiteboard was so important. Vulnerability is not safe, but it does cultivate safety. When you choose to be vulnerable and open your heart to risk love and relationship and belonging, it invites others to as well. That's what he's saying. We led the way by opening our hearts up. What's fair or what's expected or what's going to happen next is that you will begin to open yourself up back. How many of us want to be there for our kids when they're hurting, when they're scared, when their weaknesses are exposed, but you resist that, you get that wall, right? Oh, it's fine, I won't do it again. And you get resistance. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I had one child who would say, this is a private conversation and I don't like talking about things that are private. You know, my feelings belong to me. I feel that way too. How many of us would want our closest friend, that if they were hurting, for them not to act like everything is okay, but just to reach out to us? How do we get that? How do we get vulnerability and transparency with our friends and our kids and the people that we love the most? It starts by opening our hearts first. The only way to really get people to open up to us is if we open ourselves up as well. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. So as leaders in our church, or parents, or those who aspire to spiritual maturity, your job is to go first. If you're leading a group, you need to be vulnerable with your group first. If you are leading your kids, you need to talk about the things you struggle with in the right amount. If you are aspiring to spiritual maturity and you want to experience belonging, you have to begin to open your heart. Someone has to go first. Someone has to begin to create the safe space, and it is risky. We should also be careful of having a closed heart or a hard heart. Here are some warning signs I've found of a hardened heart. You don't really celebrate anymore. You don't really cry. You fake emotions. You say, I don't care a lot. So much of what's supposed to be meaningful in life begins to feel mechanical. Passion is hard to come by. You no longer believe the best about people. You're increasingly growing cynical. Those are all the warning signs of a closed and hardened heart. We need to be careful when that begins to happen, that we reverse the course and open ourselves up again. We need to be careful when people do start to open up. Even the examples I give on stage with my family. I've started just saying, like, one of my kids, right? Thank goodness I have multiple kids. When someone opens up, it probably rarely ever needs to be shared with anyone else. In our church, just to also create some transparency, I hope that you would be willing to share that with myself or Sarah, knowing that we're not going to talk about that with others. But if we want to be a community of belonging, we want the right people to see our hearts opened. We want the right people to know. That's way different, like bringing the right people into a conversation and surrounding myself with people who can help me is way different than this kind of fake vulnerability that's happening a lot in our culture right now, where I just get on social media and I dump everything out, and then I can just turn off my phone. That's not vulnerability, all right? That's called baggage dumping. It's actually a way of still controlling who we are, because we get to write whatever we want and the way we want to write it, and then we can walk away. Vulnerability becomes real when we're open. And now all of a sudden I'm talking across the table with you and me, where my church family is surrounding me. That doesn't mean everyone in this room, but that means the right people in this room. And it's a embracing of love and grace and belonging that few of us ever really experience. So we have to ask ourselves, is my heart open? Is it open to the right people? The right people are those who care about you the most and have the most opportunity to walk alongside you. So that won't be everyone. But there's a lot more than just saying, here's all my baggage. You're able to admit, like, yeah, that's something I'm still growing in. That's something it's a weakness I have. I would love some help on that. I know that's a deficiency, or thanks for pointing that out. Is my heart open? Am I a safe person for others? And do I have safe people? The reason that we can walk into these things first is because God made himself vulnerable, and he created safety by leading us into life. At the end of the movie Good Will Hunting, Will has this therapist, his name's Sean, and Robin Williams, right? And this dude's just a punk. There's also a lot of swearing in this movie, in case you haven't watched it in a while, so don't pull it up with the kids. Pulled it up on YouTube the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, this scene's pretty intense. Will is messed up, but he's highly intelligent, and he's kind of snarky, and he puts on this strong facade. And slowly but surely, this brilliant, confident, sarcastic young man, more of him starts to come out. The pain he experienced, the rejection he experienced his whole life. Every aspect of this strong persona is a defense mechanism to hide from the real thing. So that it's his way of controlling his life so that he never has to feel vulnerable again. Until Sean gets the file. And all of a sudden, the whole story's there. A story of abuse, pictures, police reports, psychological evaluations. And his defense mechanisms go up. So what's it say? I have acute grief. What's it say is wrong with me? And Sean closes the folder, and he looks him in the eye. And he says, it's not your fault. And Will kind of laughs it off. He's like, what are you doing? He says, it's not your fault. And he gets quiet. And over, Sean says, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And finally, for the first time in the movie, Will breaks down. I don't know what's in your file. But God already does. And he doesn't dump it all out and say, let's tell the world. He sets it aside. And he says, hey, my grace is real. It's not your fault. Come here. Like, don't live with this burden. Open yourself up to me. See that I am safe. See that I am good. Some of you today are not okay. Your heart's not okay. You have a relationship that's not okay. And you're afraid to take the next step. If vulnerability is this openness and this honesty that allows grace to flow into our lives, I want to give you the opportunity to take a small step toward that. Something we do sometimes at Bright City on a Sunday is we just pray for each other. We ask people who are trusted in our church who are leaders, who have led the way in being vulnerable, who hold nothing over you, to just hang out in the back of the room and to be available to pray with you. And whatever amount of honesty or vulnerability you're able to bring in prayer, that's enough. It may be a lot and you're just word dumping, and that's okay. And it may just be like, I need prayer for this. One last tool I want to leave you with is just our conversation guides. If you want to take this further, you can text belong to 740-936-5040, and it gives you access to this whole series and how we can talk about it and allow it to form us into people who belong and cultivate belonging. So we're going to have a few men and women who are going to hang out at the back of the room, and we're closing with 2 songs, trying to just give you a lay of the land. And if at any time you want prayer, we will pray for you. This is a safe space. Because God is here, because we all need his grace, and because there's life on the other end of this. Jesus, we ask that you would come now through your Holy Spirit and wash over this room in a way where every fear and every weakness has no power. And we ask that in place, your grace would fill. And would you give the boldness to those who need it, the relational courage to simply ask for help, for prayer, for someone to come alongside them. Jesus, create space even now in your warm embrace, in your grace and mercy that are new every day, so that we might experience who you truly are. In Jesus' name, amen.